We are back on Inside Politics. Our guest today, Dr. Thomas Schwartz of Vanderbilt University. We're talking about the global impacts of the coronavirus. Dr. Schwartz, moving from foreign affairs to presidential election politics, there have been many issues that have dominated President Trump's term, well, 3+ years in office. But does it all come down to his chances to be reelected, how he looks, to how the public perceives and voters perceive he's handled the pandemic, and what the state of the economy is when we go to the polls in November?
I think it will, although I've been struck by the fact that the poll numbers have not changed notably. He's still pretty much locked into about the 44 or 45% of the public that likes him versus about the 50 to 53 or 4% that don't. I think the election will come down to something like that. It'll come down to the enthusiasm with which voters for either candidate vote. It'll come down to these battleground states. You could see massive turnouts in some states like California and New York against Trump, and he still might win the election without winning the popular vote because of the battleground states. So I'm thinking the pandemic, obviously, and where the economy is, but the economy won't be in full recovery. But there'll be the argument will be who best to manage the return, and that'll be part of the issue with against Vice President Biden.
Usually when the country is facing a time of crisis, like right after 9/11, when George W. Bush was president, there's a rally around the flag, rally behind our president effect. Some of that began to happen right after the virus hit, but it seems to have faded for the president. As you mentioned, his poll numbers have gone back to what they were before. Why hasn't he been able to sustain or get more support from the public in these times of crisis?
Well, I think in the end it's because he's governing only part of the country. He's governing his base, and he has not really done a sustained effort to reach out to people who don't like him or or are kind of indifferent to him. I mean, he tends to speak to the choir. This is a sad aspect of American politics today because I think to some extent both candidates are doing that, but it is, I think the key is there's a small group in the middle that can still be appealed to, and that will probably will be where the election turns. But Trump is such a divisive and polarizing figure that he doesn't seem to be able to marshal the type of appeal to national unity that George Bush did in the wake of 9/11 or we've seen in the past with other presidents.
Most of the national polls show President Trump's likely Democratic opponent, former Vice President Joe Biden, up 6 to 8 points over him on a national. But is that a little bit misleading? I mean, you mentioned it's really going to come down to what's happening in some of the large states may pick up so many votes for Biden that it sort of distorts where he really might be in terms of the Electoral College.
Absolutely. No, I think the poll this week that was important was not the sort of national election. It was the battleground states. And in that, Trump was actually leading very within the margin of error. But it'll be the battleground states that really determine it. As long as the Electoral College stays the way it is, and there was, of course, a Supreme Court case this week about the issue of faithless electors, so that could have an impact. But if the Electoral College stays the way it has been in the past, I think the election really comes down to those battleground states.
When I was looking at the average polling on Real Clear Politics this week, they have betting odds that show President Trump is a 50% to 42% favorite. What do the bookies know that we're not seeing, or what does the smart money say about President Trump that aren't being reflected in the polls?
I think the bookies are, to some extent, recognizing that history tends to argue in favor of incumbent presidents. Now, obviously, the pandemic has had a huge impact on that, but in general, Americans usually elect their presidents, re-elect their presidents after one term. We've had 3 straight instances of that with Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, and Barack Obama. So the bookies may be betting that history, despite everything, will reassert itself, and Bush will get and Trump will get another term in office.
Getting back on a global basis, do you think political leaders across the world are discounting the fact and think that President Trump is likely to be elected? Are they sort of treating their looking forward to having President Trump for 4 more years to have to deal with as the American president?
Well, that really depends on which political leaders you're talking to. I think a lot of the European leaders, of course, desperately want Joe Biden. They want someone who they see as traditionally supportive of the NATO alliance and cooperation with Europe. Obviously, people in Iran and now I think China would like to see Biden elected. In Israel, of course, I think there's a strong feeling in support of Trump. So it really does vary around the world in terms of what these countries have seen of the president and compared to others. But overall, probably suggest that most of them are hoping, of course, that Trump is defeated, but they also recognize that they may indeed have to live with him for another 4 years.
One big question for Joe Biden is who will he pick for his vice presidential running mate. He indicates he's going to pick a woman. Does it really matter who he picks? Usually the vice president is not nearly as important for people as who they vote for. They want to vote for the president. They don't particularly care who's second on the ticket.
I actually think this is really important. I do think that Biden will be the same age as Ronald Reagan was when he left office, when he takes office, if he wins on November. So the idea that the vice president will play a significant role is, I think, going to be a big part of the campaign. And whoever Joe Biden picks, if he makes a good pick, someone who's dynamic and who really encourages turnout among the Democratic base, that could really make a difference.
A final question. It appears we're going to have a year where what the candidates do, they can't do rallies, they can't do handshaking. It's going to depend a whole lot more on surrogates and probably on paid media, particularly digital media, to get out there. We've never seen anything quite like that.
Well, we had variations of it. We've had front porch campaigns in the 19th century. We've had campaigns that really the candidates never really went out and onto the hustings in the way that is now commonplace in the 20th century. This will be different. Candidates, though, have in the past also switched at various points, for example, using lots of television that came in the 60s and 70s, using a lot of digital that has been in the recently. So it's not probably as shocking
Dr. Schwartz,
as it seems.
I think we're out of time, but thank you very much. We always appreciate you being with us, and thank you for joining us on Inside Politics. Hope you'll be back here again for a future show. If you can't get to politics in the meantime, go to the News Channel 5 website. You'll find my Capitol View commentary there. There's new commentary posted every Friday afternoon. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, and we'll see you back here next time. Stay safe. Goodbye.